Imagine standing on the windswept shores of Haida, a wild, mist-shrouded archipelago off the northern coast of British Columbia, Canada. Here, where the Pacific Ocean crashes against rugged cliffs and ancient cedar forests tower over the land, history feels alive, whispering through the trees and roaring with the waves. At the heart of this breathtaking place are the Haida people, often considered the Vikings of the Pacific Northwest. Now, don't picture scenes of pillaging and raids. That comparison isn't about conquest. It's about mastery. Like the Norse Vikings, the Haida were masters of the sea, fearless explorers who thrived in one of the world's most untamed environments. Their warrior culture, seafaring expertise, and artistry in everything from canoe building to intricate carvings made them legendary, known far and wide for their skill and resilience. They commanded the ocean in their massive cedar canoes, navigating unpredictable waters with a confidence born from generations of knowledge. But their story isn't just about survival. It's about flourishing in a place that demanded strength, ingenuity, and a deep connection to nature. They built a society so complex and rich that their aura of fierce independence rivaled that of the famed Vikings of Europe. So who were the Haida really? How did they manage to carve out an identity that has endured for thousands of years through both triumph and near devastation? Journey with me to Haida, where the past still echoes in the wind, and let's uncover the legacy of a people whose strength is as timeless as the tides that shape their homeland. Imagine standing on the shores of Haida, surrounded by mist and ancient cedar trees that stretch high into the sky. This place is more than just a cluster of islands off the coast of British Columbia. It's a cradle of culture, one of the oldest, most enduring societies in North America. Thousands of years before Europeans even knew this land existed, the Haida had already made it their home, carving out a life amid dense forests and stormy seas. According to archaeologists, the Haida people might have first arrived on Haida over 13,000 years ago, likely at a time when glaciers covered much of the continent. These islands, however, were sheltered from the most brutal effects of the Ice Age, giving the Haida a relatively stable environment rich with resources. They settled here, surrounded by the ocean and mountains, and slowly, generation by generation, their culture took root. The Haida's own stories about their origins paint a vivid, almost magical picture of how they came to be. One of the most well-known legends involves a raven, an intelligent, mischievous figure in Haida mythology who appears in countless stories. In this tale, Raven finds a clamshell on the beach, and from within, the first Haida people emerge. The story captures a core belief in the interconnectedness of life, where humans, animals, and the land itself all share a common spirit. This connection with nature wasn't just myth, it was practical too. The Haida understood their environment with an intimacy that modern ecologists could only dream of. They knew the salmon runs, the shifting tides, the seasonal rhythms of the cedar and spruce trees. These things weren't just resources, they were neighbors, guides, and sometimes even adversaries to be respected. Over time, the Haida developed sophisticated practices to live harmoniously with the land and the ocean, a relationship that would become the backbone of their society. They didn't just live here, they flourished. Communities grew along the shores, and with them came culture, knowledge, and art. Haida wasn't just a home, it was a place where the Haida's identity as a people was forged, shaped by the mist, mountains, and sea that defined their world. For the Haida, the sea was both a highway and a lifeline, a force that shaped their culture as much as the land did. Living on islands meant learning how to thrive on and around the ocean, and the Haida didn't just adapt to these waters, they conquered them. They became legendary seafarers, crafting massive cedar canoes that glided through the waves with both elegance and power. These canoes weren't just transportation, they were an art form, an expression of the Haida's relationship with the sea and a symbol of their resilience and ingenuity. Each canoe started with the selection of a towering red cedar, a tree as important to the Haida as the ocean itself. Felling a cedar was no small task. It was a ceremonial process filled with respect and tradition. Once chosen, The tree would be carefully hollowed out and shaped using tools made from bone, stone, and later metal. The Haida's skill in carving meant these canoes were balanced, durable, and sleek, capable of handling everything from calm waters to the open Pacific's unpredictable, crashing waves. Some of these canoes could carry over 50 people and were used to travel hundreds of miles, reaching as far south as Puget Sound and possibly beyond. These journeys weren't just practical, though practicality was part of it, of course. The Haida used these canoes for trade, establishing a network that stretched along the Pacific coast. Trading with other indigenous groups, they exchanged fish, furs, cedar bark, and crafted goods for tools, food, and materials that they couldn't get on their islands. But these trips were also statements of identity, pride, and skill. Imagine seeing a Haida canoe approaching your village, its carved prow and painted sides announcing it long before its passengers set foot on shore. It must have been a sight to behold, a declaration that the Haida were a people who belonged to the sea. These journeys demanded not only strength and stamina, but also a deep understanding of the ocean itself. Haida navigators knew the currents, the tides, and the stars above. They could read signs in the water and the sky, and they had an innate sense of direction that comes from years of practice and a kind of intuitive knowledge passed down from generation to generation. There was a saying among the Haida, the ocean wasn't something to fear, but to respect. And with respect came mastery. Their seafaring prowess allowed them to extend their influence and make a name for themselves as skilled traders, craftsmen, and warriors. Life in a Haida village was guided by an intricate social structure, a web of relationships and responsibilities that kept the community tight-knit yet flexible. At the heart of this structure were two main clans, the Eagles and the Ravens. These clans weren't just arbitrary groupings. They were like extended families with deep-rooted connections and complex rules governing how the Haida interacted, married, and even where they sat in the grand ceremonies that punctuated village life. Belonging to either the Eagle or Raven clan wasn't a personal choice. It was inherited through the mother's line. This matrilineal system meant that identity, status, and even property passed down from mothers to their children, making the role of women central to Haida life. A person from the Eagle clan, for instance, would always marry someone from the Raven clan and vice versa. It wasn't just a rule, it was a way of fostering unity and balance, ensuring that both clans remained interwoven and interdependent. Marriages, alliances, and community life were all built on these carefully crafted relationships. Within each clan, there were further divisions into houses or family groups, each with its own lineage, history, and stories. A house often had a chief, a leader chosen not just for wealth or strength, but for wisdom, generosity, and the ability to guide others. These chiefs held considerable power, yet they were more than rulers. They were stewards, entrusted with the well-being of their family, and responsible for passing down traditions, stories, and skills to the next generation. Chiefs hosted potlatches and ceremonies that honored their family's heritage, using these gatherings to redistribute wealth, settle disputes, and strengthen bonds within and between clans. Potlatches were more than social events. They were the glue holding Haida society together. These gatherings could last days, filled with feasting, storytelling, dancing, and gift-giving. When a chief hosted a potlatch, it was a chance to display their family's wealth and generosity, a demonstration of leadership that commanded respect. But a potlatch was also a powerful equalizer, redistributing resources to ensure that everyone had what they needed. Gifts exchanged at a potlatch weren't just material items, they represented trust, respect, and a reaffirmation of social bonds that could last a lifetime. This structure wasn't just about organizing community life, it was woven into every aspect of Haida identity. Each clan, each family, each person had a role, a story, and a responsibility. Symbols of clan identity showed up everywhere, from the intricate designs on clothing to the towering totem poles that stood as guardians of Haida villages. In a world where survival often depended on unity, the Haida's social structure reflects their deep understanding of human connection and the strength of community. If there's one thing that instantly comes to mind about the Haida, it's their artistry, particularly their totem poles. Towering over villages, carved from the same cedar trees that fueled their seafaring and sustained their homes, these poles weren't just decorations. Each one showcased the Haida creativity, spirituality, and lineage, turning wood into living stories that spoke of ancestors, mythic creatures, and the connections between all living things. Totem poles began as mighty cedar trees, carefully selected and treated with reverence. Cedar, after all, wasn't just any wood. It was a material with soul, something to be honored for its strength, flexibility, and durability. The Haida believed the tree held a spirit of its own, and when they carved a pole, they felt they were releasing the stories that had always been within the wood. This respect for cedar shows up in nearly everything the Haida created, from canoes to boxes to houses, and in their belief that every part of nature had its own spirit. Imagine the base of a pole, where you might see a powerful bear, symbolizing strength or protection, and above it, a raven with a sly grin, representing wisdom or mischief. Above them, perhaps an eagle with its wings spread wide, a guardian watching over the family. These figures, carved with incredible detail and painted with vibrant colors, were not random. They were chosen carefully to reflect the identity, heritage, and personal mythology of those who stood below them. Creating these poles was no small feat. Haida artists worked with traditional tools, using adzes and chisels to carve out complex, interlocking shapes. Their skill in carving extended to masks, bentwood boxes, and ceremonial objects, each piece carrying a meaning as intricate as the designs themselves. Masks, for instance, were used in dances and rituals, transforming the wearer into animals or spirits, allowing them to step between worlds during ceremonial gatherings. Even everyday objects, canoes, paddles, utensils, and clothing, were crafted with artistry. Each item, no matter how small, bore marks of Haida identity, symbols of clan affiliation, or stories from the past. They didn't just see art as something you looked at, it was something you lived, something that surrounded you and grounded you in your identity. When a new pole was raised, it was a communal event, celebrated with feasts, dances, and storytelling. It was a chance for the whole village to honor the past and reaffirm the ties that held them together. The act of raising a totem pole was one of reverence, pride, and joy, a reminder that the stories of the Haida were still alive, standing tall in the heart of their land. The Haida were not only artisans and storytellers, they were also warriors, skilled in battle and fiercely protective of their territory and resources. In the world of the Pacific Northwest, where disputes over resources and territory often led to conflict, the Haida built a reputation as formidable fighters, known and respected across the coast. But to understand their warrior culture, you have to look beyond mere physical strength. This was about pride, honor, and a profound sense of duty to their community. Warriors in Haida society were trained not just in combat, but in discipline, resilience, and tactics. They prepared mentally as well as physically, knowing that every raid, every confrontation, was a test of both skill and spirit. Haida warriors donned armor crafted from thick animal hides, and some wore wooden chest plates carved from the same red cedar that served so many of their other needs. Their gear was practical yet imposing, designed to protect and intimidate in equal measure. Weapons were crafted with equal care. The Haida used tools that could be both weapons of war and objects of artistry, from clubs and spears to daggers inlaid with intricate designs. These were objects that embodied the skill of the carvers who created them, blending functionality with a symbolic strength. Some weapons were decorated with clan symbols or mythological creatures, turning each weapon into a reminder of the strength and courage that came from being part of a clan. Raids were not undertaken lightly. They were planned with precision, strategy, and respect for the skill required to pull them off. Haida warriors would set out in their powerful canoes, often under the cover of darkness, ready to navigate both the physical and psychological challenges of the task at hand. These raids could be about reclaiming resources or exacting justice, but they also served as a rite of passage, a way for warriors to prove themselves and for clans to protect and honor their heritage. But despite the intensity of these conflicts, the Haida had a code of conduct in war. They respected strength and skill in their opponents, and alliances could shift with time, leading to complex webs of both rivalry and mutual respect. Victory in battle was a source of pride, but it was also a responsibility. Warriors who returned victorious were celebrated in ceremonies that honored their courage, bravery, and service to the community. In Haida society, warrior culture wasn't about conquest for conquest's sake. It was a reflection of the Haida's commitment to their land, their people, and their values. Every warrior carried not only the weight of their weapons, but the weight of their heritage, their duty, and their honor. To be a Haida warrior was to embody the spirit of resilience, a resilience that ran as deep as the ocean currents they mastered, and as strong as the cedar trees that surrounded them. Hey everyone, just a quick intermission here. I wanted to say thank you for watching this video. It really means a lot to me. Did you know that over 80% of you who are watching right now aren't subscribed to the channel? If you've enjoyed this content so far, it would be incredible if you could hit that subscribe button. It's a small gesture, but it really helps the channel grow and ensures that you won't miss any more of our fascinating stories we explore together. Also, if you're feeling generous, please give this video a thumbs up, leave a comment, and share with anyone else who may enjoy it. Your support really does make a difference and keeps the content coming. Thanks again, and let's get back to the story. While the Haida were known for their strength and skill as warriors, they were also strategic diplomats who understood the value of alliances, trade, and cooperation. Living along the Pacific coast meant they weren't alone. They shared their environment with other indigenous groups, including the Tlingit, Tsimshian, and Coast Salish peoples. These relationships were as complex and layered as the land they inhabited, marked by both moments of tension and times of mutual support. The Haida were master traders, and diplomacy often began with commerce. Through trade, they established connections that stretched far beyond Haida Gwaii, exchanging goods, knowledge, and sometimes even family members through arranged marriages. These marriages were a form of alliance, a bridge that tied clans together across regions. If a conflict arose between groups, these familial ties could be crucial, offering a way to negotiate peace and maintain harmony without resorting to violence. Through trade, the Haida exchanged their renowned crafts, like finely woven cedar hats, carved tools, and unique artworks, for goods that were scarce on the islands, such as copper, obsidian, and certain animal furs. These trading relationships weren't merely economic transactions. They were about mutual respect and the recognition of each other's strengths. Of course, not all interactions were peaceful. The Pacific Northwest was a land of plenty, but resources like fishing grounds, hunting territories, and even specific cedar trees could be sources of tension. Disputes over these resources sometimes led to conflicts, and the Haida, with their warrior culture, knew how to defend their interests. However, they rarely escalated these disputes unnecessarily. They preferred resolving conflicts through diplomacy when possible, using councils of chiefs or intermediaries who could speak for their clans and negotiate solutions that everyone could live with. But when diplomacy broke down, the Haida were prepared to fight. Skirmishes with neighboring groups weren't uncommon, but these conflicts had rules, customs, and a sense of honor. There was a mutual respect in these clashes, a recognition that strength wasn't just about winning, but about showing resilience, courage, and a willingness to stand up for one's community. Even in conflict, the Haida valued a fair fight, where skill and bravery determined the outcome more than sheer aggression. These complex relationships allowed the Haida to build a reputation not just as warriors, but as leaders in their region. They were respected, perhaps even a bit feared, but also admired for their ability to navigate both friendship and rivalry with grace and skill. The arrival of Europeans on the Pacific Northwest coast brought a wave of change that would forever alter the Haida's way of life. In the late 18th century, explorers like George Dixon and Captain James Cook reached Haida Gwaii. drawn by tales of vast natural resources and the chance to trade with indigenous people. At first, these encounters were cautiously optimistic. The Haida saw an opportunity in these new visitors, access to goods and materials they hadn't seen before, like iron tools, firearms, and woven textiles. Early interactions between the Haida and Europeans were marked by curiosity and practicality. The Haida were adept traders, and they quickly grasped the potential of European goods, which they integrated into their own crafts and daily life. Iron, for instance, allowed them to create even finer tools for carving, taking their artistry to new levels. But the Haida didn't just adapt to these new materials. They transformed them, blending European items into their culture with an ingenuity that made the imported goods their own. However, trade came with its dangers. Alongside European goods came European diseases, illnesses the Haida had never encountered before. Smallpox, in particular, proved devastating. The disease swept through Haida villages like wildfire, tragically decimating the population. It's estimated that smallpox and other diseases reduced the Haida population by as much as 90% in some areas, leaving communities weakened and families torn apart. This loss was profound, both on a personal level and for the culture as a whole. Entire villages were abandoned, and traditions and knowledge that had been passed down for generations were suddenly at risk of disappearing. Despite these tragic losses, they continued to negotiate and adapt. Some chiefs sought to establish alliances with European traders to gain access to essential resources, while others took a more cautious approach, wary of the new dangers that had come with this foreign presence. There was a sense of ambivalence. On one hand, the Haida could see the practical benefits of certain European technologies, but on the other, they were painfully aware of the destructive impact these outsiders brought with them. As European influence tightened its grip on Haida Gwaii, the Haida faced immense pressure to abandon the very practices that defined their identity. Colonial policies aimed at civilizing indigenous communities sought to reshape the Haida way of life, often with devastating consequences. Missionaries arrived with strict rules, urging the Haida to convert to Christianity and leave behind their own beliefs. To the missionaries and government officials, Haida spirituality, with its rituals, totems, and potlatches, was something to be stamped out, seen as pagan or backward, rather than the rich cultural tradition it truly was. The Canadian government went so far as to ban the potlatch in 1884, an act that struck at the heart of Haida culture. Potlatches were more than ceremonies. They were lifelines of Haida society, places where family ties were strengthened, wealth was redistributed, and history was honored. By banning this tradition, the government effectively attempted to dismantle the Haida social structure, aiming to force them into a Western way of life. But the Haida's response to this ban was quietly defiant. While some families felt the pressure to abandon the practice, others held potlatches in secret, risking punishment to preserve their customs. The ban on the potlatch was just one part of a broader effort to erase Indigenous identities across Canada. Haida children were taken from their homes and sent to residential schools, where they were forbidden to speak their language or practice their traditions. The residential school system aimed to assimilate Indigenous children, but in reality, it stripped them of their culture, leaving scars that would affect generations. The trauma of these schools extended beyond language and traditions. It broke families, leaving many children without a sense of belonging or pride in their heritage. Despite these forces, the Haida didn't give up. They found ways to adapt, even as they fought to protect the threads of their culture that colonialism threatened to sever. Some Haida communities continued to carve totem poles and create their traditional art, though often in secret. Artists and storytellers played a crucial role, preserving Haida heritage through their work. They passed down stories and skills quietly, often at great personal risk, but always with the hope that future generations would one day be free to celebrate their culture openly. Haida Gwaii, rich in resources, became a target for industries like logging and fishing, which threatened the ecosystem that had sustained the Haida for millennia. As outsiders sought to exploit these resources, the Haida found themselves fighting not only for their culture, but for the land that was so deeply tied to it. By the late 20th century, after generations of cultural suppression, the Haida began to experience a renaissance, a powerful wave of revival that breathed new life into their traditions, language, and land. Elders, artists, and activists took it upon themselves to restore what had nearly been lost. Their efforts weren't just about reclaiming traditions. They were about rebuilding a sense of pride and identity that colonial forces had tried so hard to erase. One of the most visible aspects of this revival was the resurgence of Haida art, which had long been a cornerstone of their culture. Artists like Bill Reed and Robert Davidson became instrumental in reawakening interest in Haida carving, jewelry, and totem poles. Bill Reed, part Haida himself, had grown up separated from the culture, but returned to his heritage, eventually becoming one of the most renowned Indigenous artists in Canada. His work brought global attention to Haida art, showcasing its elegance, complexity, and depth to a world that had largely overlooked it. But Reed and Davidson weren't just reviving an art form, they were reviving a language, a worldview, a way of being. Totem poles were raised once again, not only as beautiful carvings, but as declarations of identity, pride, and survival. These artists demonstrated that Haida art wasn't a relic of the past, but a living tradition, evolving and adapting to new contexts while retaining its deep-rooted meaning. The revival of totem poles and other art forms became a rallying point for the community, a way to say, we are still here, and we are still Haida. Alongside this artistic revival came a push to reclaim the Haida language, also known as Zatkil, which had suffered under the residential school system and generations of enforced assimilation. Zatkil is considered an endangered language, with only 24 native speakers at this time. Elders who still spoke the language became invaluable resources, teaching younger generations and passing on words, phrases, and stories that carried centuries of knowledge and history. Language classes and immersion programs were established, helping to reconnect the younger Haida with their heritage. For many, learning their ancestral language was an emotional experience, a way to reclaim a piece of themselves that colonial policies had tried to take away. The Haida also fought for their land. In the 1980s, they made headlines by staging a peaceful blockade to protest the logging of old-growth cedar forests in the area of Lyle Island, a place they considered sacred. The Haida, joined by environmentalists and allies, stood in defiance of powerful logging interests, recognizing that the health of their land was directly tied to the survival of their culture. Their efforts led to the creation of Guaihanas National Park Reserve and Haida Heritage Site, a groundbreaking agreement where the Haida Nation co-manages the park with Parks Canada. This achievement was monumental, signaling a new era where the Haida could actively protect and govern their ancestral land. The establishment of the Haida Heritage Center further solidified this cultural revival. Opened in 2007, the center became a place of learning, celebration, and preservation. Here, visitors could experience Haida culture firsthand, and young Haida could learn from their elders, connecting with the land, language, and customs that defined their people. The center symbolized not only a commitment to preserving Haida heritage, but also a willingness to share it with the world, to show that the Haida were not a vanished people, but a vibrant, thriving community with a rich past and a hopeful future. Today, Haida Gwaii is a living reminder of the strength and cultural resurgence of the Haida people. It's a place where the past and present blend effortlessly, full of stories and traditions that continue to thrive. The Haida have become champions of both culture and the environment, using ancient knowledge and modern activism to protect what matters most. Their efforts have turned Haida Gwaii into a powerful symbol of hope and resilience, showing that even in the face of overwhelming challenges, a community can reclaim its identity and shape its future. It's not just about survival, it's about thriving with a fierce pride and connection to the land that runs as deep as the roots of the towering cedar trees.